Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Trolling with Logic. It's the 12th of October 2013. It's 7 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the States. Just the usual quick announcements. We're on every week, kind of live skeptical show. We do take calls during the show, as you can see on the screen. Just add the Skype contact Trolling with Logic. Send me a quick PM. Just give me the gist of your question, and we'll add you in due course to the call. Also, please remember, if you do call in, you are granting us permission to use your likeness, so no funny stuff for the DMCAs once the show is uploaded. Also, another quick copyright announcement. The recordings of these shows are public domain, so feel free to reproduce it, spread it around. Just make sure you link back to us as a nice courtesy. And with that, we can quickly introduce this week's panel. A little bit, one sort of new face anyway. One old timer of Tool. Please welcome back everyone, the Wolfman Ferridier. It's awesome to have you back.
Hey guys, great to be back.
Yeah, suppose I'll just quickly ask you, so what are you thinking of what you've seen of the show in your absence?
You get whoever that is, that was not me.
You're right. I think that's at Kitch's end, we're hearing something.
Yeah. Everything okay over there?
Yeah. There's an angry Irish woman in the background.
Uh-oh.
Right, anyway, like I said, so what do you think?
Good luck to you, Kitch. Good luck to you. Anyway, yeah, I've been keeping up with you guys' progress, and I'm loving every bit. I cannot believe how far this has gone. I remember years back when it just started with me, Ryu, and Chastity Spike, and it was just three guys just making a team effort on YouTube, and then over the years we tried to so many people, and it just sprang into this. Now we've got people from all over the world in a team effort to basically just counter pseudoscience and just bullshit. And we're getting so much viewers, so many downloads, and our podcasts are on iTunes. I know I have not been around for most of this, but for those of you guys who have taken the reins and just brought this to where it is, you guys are unbelievably awesome.
Thank you very much, and welcoming as always the Iceman himself, and as some would say, our bargain basement of Thor in Sweden, Mortimer.
Hi, and you actually got it right this time. You didn't call me Norwegian.
Oh, we can do that later on, don't worry. There's plenty.
No,
we're playing Unreal Tournament after this, so we know how to get you raging. And sitting in merry old Ireland, please welcome everyone. You know him and love him, the Kitch.
Hey, everybody.
We know him anyway.
Yes. The love him bits up for debate at the moment. So I suppose we shall quickly introduce the guest. Usually, this isn't a pure reflection on the guest. I usually manage to get like a nice, long, really kind of elegant introduction, but we know this man from a really neat little book that he's just released called Building Your Skeptical Toolkit. It's sitting here on my Kindle right now. I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through it. A nice little book, good introduction to critical thinking skills, skepticism, just, battling all kinds of woo, which is kind of quite relevant to all of us. So please welcome the Rabbit Pirate, also known as Mr. Andrew Dart. A very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here, and very glad you're enjoying the book.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, I don't know, who should we go? I think in the pre-show chat, Wolfie, you had some questions already lined up, did you? You've been kind of reading quite a bit as well. So, and as this is you returning from a lengthy sabbatical, will inflict you with the nervousness of the first questions.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm not through the book. I got the book like right here on my screen. I'm reading. I'm probably 3/4 of the way through it, but I gotta say it's a really well written book. Straight through, just easy to go through. I love how it just walks through every single piece, all the way from like describing different the laws of logic, or the different fallacies, or how science works. Because I think, well, that's definitely something that's really needed here in America, considering how we have a lot of people that don't really know the first couple of things about it. But the people that are rampant around my area, that I guess are not fully, well, scientifically minded. Smart people, but not scientifically minded, are the green type people who are like all anti-Monsanto and anti-GMOs. Now, I don't know what our viewers take on that stuff, but I my questions regarding to Andy, because you delve a lot into vaccines, but how would you deal with people who are concerned about like toxins or stuff that we eat, or because there are people who around here like to eat raw foods or only organics or all natural, and you did mention all natural in your books, but you also say that does not guarantee that it's necessarily the best for you. What else would you add regarding all natural foods or something of that category?
Ooh, dear. It's not an area that I know that much about, to be honest, but basically I think with things like GM crops and that, the mistake that they often make is that somehow because it's genetically modified, it's evil and dangerous and stuff like that. But basically, genetic modification is speeding up what happens naturally anyway. You know, in the past, farmers would try to breed different crops to get the hardiness, to get the greater yield and stuff. These days, we just have better tools for doing that, and I personally don't see how that suddenly makes a corn on the cob dangerous, because science has been used to make it resistant to bugs and things like that, rather than more traditional techniques. As for the all natural thing, like I said, there's a lot of things that are natural that are bad for you. There's natural poisons. Just because something's natural doesn't mean eating it won't do you harm. And so, and on the other side of it, you have things like aspirin. Aspirin comes from willow tree bark. Now, you could, if you want, go down to the woods, scrape off some bark, mix it up in some water and take that when you have a headache. But it's much easier to take the aspirin tablet, which has basically had scientists take the bark, identify the element chemical in there that cures the headaches, and refined it. So just because that approach may be viewed as artificial doesn't mean it's somehow inferior to the natural approach of eating a lump of wood to cure your headache.
Correct. And I also think, this is just my inside view, because there's like a lot of people, like I said, in my area that are concerned about this stuff. I think it mostly stems from their don't trust the government sort of mindset. And that's kind of how I, a while back, got suckered into this, because I did not apply the sort of scientific critical thinking to it. The stuff that you provide very well in your book, and I wish I had that a long time ago, but, I'm an American, and we don't really like our government that much.
Same over here.
Our polls show cockroaches are more popular than our government. So from that perspective, since we don't trust the government, we don't trust that they are testing the foods properly. We don't go from that. So it starts from a political perspective, and that is basically the core of it. It's not. It doesn't start off as a sort of a health issue. I don't think it's because the USDA and the EPA and the FDA, they test these things. They make sure the farms are efficient, and they make sure that the food is safe or healthy. There's like no link that leads to cancers that found in these foods or whatever. So it starts from a political mindset, and the scientific mindset is not included in there. So, but when I started thinking about it, do these foods work? Then I looked into the scientific literature, and I could not find anything. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm in the right position for this. And yeah, and ever since then, I've been sort of deemed a sort of heretic, more or less, from the organics or the organic people around here. But it become almost a second religion to these people. If you just apply a little bit of the critical thinking or the scientific mindset, and you'll be able to see you'll be able to see behind the curtain and see how full of nonsense it is. It's the same with religion. It's the same with the organics. But in order to make that step, you need to know. You have to keep in mind or understand laws of logic, how to do experiments, and how to just go through the scientific method and build your skeptical toolkit. So,
Could I
this book
add
is
something here?
Yes, go ahead.
I think, and I'm sorry, I haven't read that much of your book. I haven't had time to do that. I like what I've read so far, though. So maybe you cover this idea of some link between politics and science, like what's accepted by the mainstream scientific community is often regarded as that's what the powers that be want you to believe, or something like that. So it gets mixed in with this distrust of politicians or whatever. You see that in the climate change thing, for example. When you have someone actually bringing in actual science, saying, we have a problem here, then it's all, so you're a communist. It's, it works both ways there.
It's not something I actually go into much detail in the book. Interestingly enough, I wrote a whole chapter about how to identify experts, and how basically you get a lot of claims where it's like, my expert is better than your expert, and so I wrote a whole chapter on how to identify if someone really is an expert in the field that they're talking about, and ended up taking it out of the book. Now it's available as a PDF on my website if you feel like reading it, but basically I go through talking about do they have expertise in the field that they're talking about? Are their qualifications from legitimate institutes, or did they buy them online? And are they making claims based upon the evidence? Are their claims supported by the general consensus of the scientific community? Things like that. I haven't really touched on like the political angle of it, but I completely agree with what you say, and especially with things like climate change. And issues like that, you have
vaccines come up there as well. Politicians want people to get vaccinated, so obviously that's a conspiracy, right?
Well, and then you get on the other side, you get political candidates who campaign by being against those things, and exactly. It's because they know that there is this distrust of them, because people distrust the government. So if they come out against them, people will trust them. And it's worrying when science becomes politicized, and it's like science isn't up for a vote. We don't vote on scientific truths.
And that's kind of the point that I'm sorry, Ferry, I'm going to be quick here. That's sort of I kind of lost track of it, but that's the point I wanted to make, that people need to understand that scientists don't come to conclusions that politicians order them to come to. They investigate things. They get paid the same amount, whatever conclusion they come to. You don't, Kitch, for example. I mean, suppose you come to the conclusion that gold nanoparticles can't be used for anything. You're still going to get paid the same.
Pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's not
that scientists are just government pawns or something. They haven't been bribed to come to a certain conclusion.
And a great example that you could tell that scientists are not pawns of the government is when you have the politicians going against the scientists. Because if the scientists were working for the government, you figure the politicians would be right next to them instead of being against them. And a great example here, back in America, would be in Texas. A while ago, there was this whole fuss regarding what's going to go into the Texas school books, and one of the opponents of it, I don't remember his name. I just remember he was a dentist, and he said this to the board, the school board. He says, "Someone's got to stand up to these experts."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that guy was, that dentist, he was once on the school board, but he got voted out a while ago because he was just crazy.
There was one thing I wanted
He was
to,
from Texas.
for Andy, and it's something that I've heard a lot of people talk about. It's like, especially with anti-vax, and there's one name very closely associated with Jenny McCarthy, and she's very famous for going on TV against these scientists, and she can emote really well. I mean, whatever else you want to say about her, like, you know, mothers watching, they can really emote to that. I mean, how do you think people should tackle that? Because, you know, like for a lot of mums, seeing like Jenny McCarthy crying and saying her mother instincts compared to a scientist that's just going to come out with some pie charts. I mean, it's, you know, like kind of the mother sitting at home who she's going to listen to more. So how do you think people could get that message across about these things?
I think that scientists need, in many cases, to be less academic. They, like you said, they don't want to come out with the pie charts and the numbers and things like that. I think, in some way, it's like using the same sort of tactics. You know, when they're coming out and saying, vaccines causes autism, you can point out that no, that's not the case. But then you can also turn around and say, but not having a vaccine may reduce herd immunity, which results in children dying from whooping cough. You know, you can still use the emotional arguments because they exist on our side of the fence as well. I mean, not necessarily saying that's always the best approach, but I don't think we need to, just because we're being in the skeptical side of things, we don't need to be pigeonholed into just talking about facts and figures. We can use stories and anecdotes and things like that to put our point across, because, you know, those are the things that work better with the lay public anyway. I mean, you read some of like the famous books on skepticism, like Demon Haunted World and things like that. It's all stories and things like that. It's drawing people into the story and showing how this works in the real world, rather than just presenting them with facts and figures. So.
Okay. Any guys? Do you have any follow-up questions there?
Yeah, we haven't heard from Kitch that much.
Yeah, Kitch. I think you'll
put you on
probably
the
have some
spotlight.
questions on this.
Yes. I just wonder why did you write this book, the Building Your Skeptical Toolkit? What was the driving force for you to sit down and start typing away? Because it's a great book, and
Thank you.
but it's quite a lot of work, so you must have been really motivated.
I suppose the main motivation was thought that I wanted a book that would have been useful to me when I was first starting out as a skeptic. I remember when I sort of first came across the concept of skepticism as something you could be, you know, being a skeptic, actively engaging in skepticism. I was coming across things like Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, where they would talk about using skeptical tools, by which they meant concepts and ideas such as the scientific method and an understanding of logical fallacies and things like that, in order to evaluate the world skeptically. And it took me, I think, years to feel I was in a situation to call myself a proper skeptic, because I had to do so much research and so much reading and listening to what other people said before I understood the tools that they were talking about. So I decided I wanted to write a book that would talk about those tools. You know, talk about the scientific method, talk about the placebo effect, talk about logical fallacies and things like that, and outline them in a clear, logical way that, and put them in a book that could be given to someone just starting out on the skeptical journey to bring them up to speed. You know, to get them to feeling they were a fully rounded skeptic much quicker than I did. So yeah, I mean that was sort of the thought behind it. I suppose the other driving factors is that, like I imagine all of you guys like me are interested in the subject. Skepticism is something that interests you. You probably feel very passionate about it. I felt the same way, but I didn't feel confident to go on YouTube and make videos about it. I tried doing a blog and things like that, but I found that I never got around to like keeping up to date, so that didn't work. So I found that writing was a good way to do it, and I spent I think 3 years writing the book on and off, and I'd work a bit, write a chapter, and then go away for a while, come back, do some more, and I found that for me that was a way to get my passion for skepticism out, get my ideas and my thoughts down on paper, and then finally at the end of the day have it all concise and tidy and without the ums and ers that would probably come if I was talking. And yeah, do it that way. So that those are the sort of motivations for writing the book.
And then
I need to very quickly sneak in and say something here. This whole idea of teaching people about not just a scientific method, but also teaching them about logical fallacies. That's something that it pisses me off. Why aren't we teaching kids that in school?
Completely agree.
Whenever I get a chance, I'm a teacher myself. I mean, when I get a chance, I try to actually explain, here's why this stupid claim doesn't work. And, but I don't teach philosophy, so I can't spend a lot of time on that stuff, which really sucks. But I mean, people need to understand those issues with, like, why is this not a convincing argument? Things like that.
No, I agree completely. I mean, I've in the last few years, I've gone back to university to sort of retrain, and I've had classes where they've been talking about logic like that, and it amazes me that even at university level, so many people have no idea about that sort of thing. I remember a lecture I went to where they, I can't remember exactly what the argument was, they introduced an argument and asked, who agrees with this side, who agrees, and I think I was the only person who disagreed with it, and it was because I had an understanding of how logic worked. And out of a class of 200 people at that time, I was the only person who put my hand up, saying, "No, it's this," and I turned out to be right. And it wasn't anything complicated. It was just something a simple understanding of this leads to this, I completely agree. I think they should have classes on logic, teaching people how to think, not what to think. I mean, 1 hour a week, in school, teaching people how to evaluate arguments, how to understand evidence, would be more useful than some of the classes I remember having at school, which now I can't remember anything I learned in them. And
it's tied into that. When preparing for this book, did you have to sort of go back to school yourself in a way? And were you surprised maybe at how much you did or didn't know, like when you were kind of like researching a lot of the topics of the book?
Oh yeah, definitely. I read lots of books by more prominent skeptics and read what they had to say on things. I did a lot of research on the internet. I went to the library and things like that. I had to go back to school in sort of a big way to make sure that what I was saying was valid. I mean, I think the last 50 odd pages of the book are the references I used. I mean, there's hundreds of the things. I was like, if I didn't want to say anything in the book unless I had at least 2 or 3 sources backing it up. I didn't want to base it on like what one website had argued. So, which in many occasions was a pain. I'd find something which illustrated my point ideally, and I'd check somewhere else and find out that no, that's not actually true. So I didn't want to use that example. A lot of research was required, a lot of reading, a lot of checking things out. An awful lot of work went into just making sure that I was describing things accurately. Even like a chapter on the scientific method, which you would think would be fairly straightforward. You go, you develop a hypothesis, you work out a way of testing it, you test it. If your test demonstrates what you want, you publish it, and then other people, analyze it looking for faults. I think you'd think that would be straightforward, but when I was doing research, I found so many different versions of the scientific method, and the fact that there isn't one method. It's a general collection of ideas and concepts that form a sort of basic pattern, but that, depending on what area of science you're looking at, may be slightly different. And that was something I didn't know. I'd always heard people talk about the scientific method and assumed that this is like a checklist. I just go down and make sure I've done that. But it's not. It's a way of thinking, and I had to learn that because it wasn't something I was aware of. And there are many other things in the book that I had a concept of when I started writing it, and then found out that my concept was wrong, and had to change to fit with what I was finding. So yeah, a lot of schooling.
Did any of the scientific methods you come across mention the stage where all your experiments fail and you're in the fetal position for a week?
No, but yes, I know that stage well.
Or when your paper comes back and they just said, no, this sucked.
Yes, just submitted a paper myself based on my dissertation in my undergraduate, and I'm currently waiting for it to come back to say it sucked. So yes.
Okay, guys, I do have a caller wanting to come in, so if you guys can field a few questions while I get the caller in.
Okay, I'll go.
Damn it, I hate being put on the
How
spot.
has the reception been?
Not huge. I haven't sold huge numbers of comic books yet. Got a lot of positive feedback from my fellow students at uni. They're all kind of amazed that I managed to write a book and do my degree at the same time. But yeah, I mean, the reception from people I know has been great. I haven't had. I mean, you guys are the first non-people people I don't know personally.
Yeah.
Not non-people, because you're on the internet. You're the first people I've had
We're on
feedback
the internet,
from.
we don't count.
Oh yeah, exactly. First people I've had feedback from who I haven't known. So and so far you've all been incredibly positive, and I really appreciate that.
Okay, we do have a caller. Angry, are you there?
No, I am not here.
All right. You're a non-person as well, are you?
I'm on the internet, therefore I do not exist.
Anyway, you've got a question for Andy.
Yes, I do. How would you say the best way to deal with false skeptics is? People who push an air of skepticism, basically saying, oh, I'm very skeptical and I think of all situations, but if you listen to them long enough, you find that they're very close-minded, set in their ways, and won't listen to other sides of an argument. What would you say is the best way to deal with that?
Patience and evidence, and I suppose taking their arguments back to basics, finding a point where you have common agreement with them, and then working from there. You find a point you agree on and say, well, I think that the evidence points in this direction, you think it points in that direction. Why do you think it points in that direction? Can you lead me through the steps, and we'll discuss where I think you're going wrong. You can explain to me why you don't think you're going wrong. Interestingly enough, as I was saying earlier, that I wrote a chapter that I took out of the book. I wrote another chapter that I took out of the book about false skeptics, about people who claim to be skeptical but aren't actually skeptical. And so the two topics that have come up today are the two chapters I took out of the book. So that's always good.
Is there a third chapter, just so we can cut straight to that in the questions?
No. Just those two. I think it's you have to start with people like that from find some common level of agreement. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. If they're saying black is white and you're saying no, it's not, you're not going to get anywhere with that. And I think sometimes at the end of the day, you have to you admit that there are people you can't reach. I mean, someone who's saying, I don't know, 9/11 was an inside job. I'm skeptical because I think it was a conspiracy, and you're probably not going to convince that person. So you have to decide what the point of your conversation with them is. Are you going to waste all your time trying to convince them, or do you want to get the alternate ideas out there for less biased people to read? I mean, before we started going on the show, there was talk about Ray Comfort, and I often find myself over on Ray Comfort's blog. I don't know why I do it to myself, but the main reason
we all do similar things.
I know is you have your crazy moments. The main reason I go there is not to try and convince the people who post there that they're wrong. It's to offer the alternate view, so that someone coming in who's not already set on one side or the other can look at the arguments and see that one of them makes more logical sense than the other. One of them presents evidence and reasons, and one of them is going, but what about this? What about that? And I think sometimes you can't reach people, so you have to do the best you can with what you've got to reach others through that.
So
Has that answered your question at all? I don't know.
it actually kind of did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm getting from this is what you would say to deal with a false skeptic is, if you can't reach them, then at least try and, in a way, reach the people they're talking to or about in a way as to kind of give an alternate view and let them make up their mind.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'd say when it comes to reaching anybody, the way it's pretty much the same. You present evidence, you present reasons for your argument, you try to show why their arguments are false. But when you have someone who, because people who are, like you're saying, false skeptics, they tend to be, in my experience, kind of hardened in their beliefs. The people who are skeptical of the story behind 9/11 or skeptical of evolution or things like that, they tend to be quite strong in their beliefs that they're right, and sometimes you can't reach them. So the only thing you can do is present your reasons and logic and arguments against them to their audience, to the people who might be more open.
Fair enough.
That also means that you shouldn't be having private conversations with them. You should keep it in public.
Yeah,
there's just no point. I've had this on YouTube so many times, like, we can't have a discussion in the comment section because, they suck. So let's do it via PMs. And, well, no one's going to see it then. And there's no point.
No,
because I'm not going to convince that idiot. I mean, he thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old. What's the point?
Exactly. I mean, I'm in a conversation with some guy on Ray's blog at the moment, and I know for a fact that if I didn't think there were other people reading what I was saying, it would be a complete waste of my time. There's no way I'm ever going to get through to this guy. But the reason I reply when he talks to me is that I want to show people the flaws in his arguments. I want to show that there is an alternate way of looking at things. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is use your conversation with one of these false skeptics to reach other people.
I kind of do the same thing, especially just regarding Ray Comfort. I don't go to his blog. I just cannot stand that, and because I already know you cannot change his mind. Because this is just me. I don't think Ray is that stupid when it comes to evolution. I think he's just straight in it for the money. He knows his audience. Mm-hmm. This guy makes a lot of money, and so yeah, he's just he wants attention, and then he just wants money. That's it. So I'm only concerned about the people who are listening to him. So I usually blog on my own blog at Fairdeer28 or The Godless Wolf, and I've reviewed like probably a dozen of his books, just pointing out every single bullshit piece in it. And sometimes I get views, sometimes I don't.
Fucking time.
Oh yes, just like Andy here, spending years on this one book. I basically spent a good portion of my college years during my free time when I wasn't studying, just reading up Ray's books for free on Google Books, and just going, yeah, that's just cool. And I just put it on the blog.
Well, that's one of the benefits of going on his blog. He occasionally sends out free books to his people who post there. I've got several of his books that are signed by Ray that he sent me for free. So
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
The only book I didn't buy a book from him directly. I just mainly got it on eBay. Is a book called Evolution: A Fairy Tale for Grown-Ups. And I spent the longest time on this, and I tried to post it on RationalWiki.com, but they got rid of it because it was too big. It's just basically 280 quotes. Most of them are quote mines, and on really page 1, paragraph 2, he admits he's quote mining. He knows he's quote mining. He really does. And so I'm going through every single quote. I'm looking up their sources. Is the guy got the correct credentials? Is it coming from a reliable source? And I once, some places I could not, I did not have access to, like magazines or whatever. I contacted the National Center for Science Education, and one of their directors, his name is Glenn. He helped me out with there, and he's like, "Wow, this is really amazing. You should turn this into a website." Maybe I'll look into that later on, but I'm sorry, I just got way sidetracked. The one final point, like when Marty was going on saying like you want to make sure that these conversations are public. That is the right idea. I don't like personal messages. I want it to be out there, but everybody here who has a debate on YouTube or Facebook or whatever knows that. Well, when it's common with creationists, they'll block you. They'll delete you, and just imagine this whole thing never took place. And latest one for me was not from a creationist; it was from a 9/11 truther. He said, "Do we still believe Building 7 came down? It did not take any damage." That was his exact words. It did not take any damage. I'm like, hello, there's pictures of there's several floors on fire, and I don't know what dictionary you're using, but I'm pretty sure fire equates damage. He got rid of me just like with it. Yeah. Did not even take him 10 minutes. His whole post, I was gone, and he acted like the whole thing never happened.
That kind of reminds me of the saying, "Never argue with a fool. People might not be able to tell the difference." I'm always aware of that.
That's one of the advantages of having a conversation on, in the form of YouTube videos, is that you have the video evidence that the conversation took place, and you can make that public.
Somewhat reminds me of one of the only times I've ever actually talked to Nephilim Free, which I don't know if I can stand that kind of brain damage again. And this is from someone who's halfway through a bottle of Jack Daniels.
Halfway is not enough to deal with Neph.
Oh, I was through about 2-3 bottles of vodka. I was fucking blackout drunk by the end. But
is Netflix still going strong on YouTube?
I don't know.
No idea.
Would say strong, but
I think people are just ignoring him now. That's it. People are just gotten bored.
Good.
But
he hasn't really posted anything.
It was well, if I can steer everyone back now.
Let's keep away from that chasm of stupid.
Yeah, it was a question for Andy, like the chapter on logical fallacies. What's your particular most hated fallacy that keeps cropping up for you, that you keep encountering, that just really gets on your wick every time you see it?
I think probably the one that winds me up is the straw man one, simply because of the blatant dishonesty involved. I mean, it's you can't defeat the argument they're making, so you make up one you can. I mean, a lot of the other fallacies are basically come down to bad reasoning. You know, people don't necessarily know they're making them. They say something and don't realise the fallacy in the statement they're making. But with a straw man, you read the argument being made, you then change it to something else and spit it back at someone saying, "Oh, but if this happens," it just always strikes me as dishonest, and that's why it's my least favourite one to have to deal with, because you're starting from a point where you're dealing with someone who's being dishonest about the arguments you're making. Not just not understanding or not putting a good argument forward, but actively being dishonest.
And what's the worst case you've come across of that, of people just straw manning, in your own encounters with true believers?
I think just go over to Ray's blog and read any conversation I've had with someone over there.
Yeah.
There's a chap I'm talking to at the moment who seems either intentionally misunderstanding what I say, or he's just got incredibly bad reading comprehension. And we've been having a conversation about losing one's faith, and I took quite a while to explain the process I went through, because when I was younger I was a Christian, and the process I went through of losing my faith, and I sort of explained, it took me years for it to happen, so I explained I came across things that didn't make sense, I investigated them and found more things that didn't make sense, and that I prayed a lot about it, I spoke to other people, and yet it didn't help. And I mentioned that it was a very painful process, and that I was quite upset by the fact I was losing my faith, and that it wasn't something I wanted to happen. And he came back with, "So you got upset, so you gave up on God?" And it was like, well, no, that's completely not what I said. You've twisted my words to support your argument that somehow I did it intentionally. And so I mean that's one that comes to mind. Whether it's the worst one I've encountered, I don't know. But yeah.
In your book, you mentioned that one of your favorites was the post
hoc ergo propter hoc. Yes.
Yeah.
I can never remember that one right.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't remember.
I just like that one. Don't really ask me why. I just like how it sounds. I think.
What's the best example you can give us of that one for anyone in the audience not familiar?
Blimey.
I think the best one is
easy time
if someone prays and it happens and they think, "Oh, the prayer worked."
Yeah. I mean, the one that immediately pops to mind is you guys were talking about 9/11 and that. And there's, I believe with Building 7, there's a recording of someone saying, "Pull it," or something like that before the building collapsed. And the argument is basically, well, he said pull it, then the building collapsed, therefore he was ordering them to collapse the building. And no, just because he said it before it collapsed doesn't mean what he said caused it to collapse. And so that's an example that pops into my head.
So it's like an appeal to hindsight, really.
Yeah. It's just because something happens before something else doesn't mean that thing caused it. So
and another example that I would suggest is vaccines, and parents who say that their kids who developed autism, they said immediately beforehand or in around the same time they got their childhood dose of vaccinations. And then they say, "Oh, then that has to be the cause."
Yeah.
My favourite response to people that would say, "Oh, vaccines cause autism," is, "Yes, and not having vaccines causes death."
Yes.
Because it's brilliant just seeing how they react, because they can't say, but I'd sooner have it. No, but oh shit. Well, this argument's gone.
Was one thing that came up there, and I just saw this the other day, and it's something that's come up in some conversation, and it might sound bad at first, but what I've tended to notice is just looking, at the newsstands, well, especially here in the UK, that for some reason women always seem to be targeted by woolmeisters. Knows that they're always very specific. You just look at women's magazines, and there's always like, homeopathy and spiritualism and all that. Have you come across that, and like, how do you think we could combat that?
Oh,
With kicked in the bollocks.
I don't really know. So I mean,
Yeah, because
I guess I've noticed it. I mean, not reading many women's magazines myself.
Yeah.
I'm haven't got that much personal
especially
experience of it.
recently, there's been a issue with Tesco's. There's that magazine that came out, "What Doctors Don't Want to Tell You," kind of, and it is absolutely appalling what's in this. It's recommending chiropractic, like for your 2-year-old child and all this kind of thing when the bones are still developing. It's giving out the most horrific advice.
Yeah.
And,
I'm probably the wrong person. I think you probably need to talk to a woman skeptic to
or
get
at
the best
least,
advice on
or at least, say if you're at work and you see like one of your co-workers sitting down to read that, how do you kind of bridge that gap? Whereas, because they're obviously reading, oh well, this looks good, and this person says that, and that.
Well, could I actually chime in on this? Because I work in Tesco's, and the few times that someone's gone to buy that, I will just look at the cover and say, you do know this is just full of bullshit, right? And I've had my manager say, you're not supposed to say that, and then just point to the cover and the shit that's on it and just say, look and laugh.
Well, apart from the Northern Irish solution, what do you recommend,
Yes.
Andrew?
Did I mention bricks, bottles, or explosives? No, shut up.
I guess. I mean, you can't always sort of go wading in there. If you see like a co-worker reading something like that, you can't always just jump in there. But I mean, if they raise the subject with you, you can say, well, I don't believe that's the case, and here are my reasons for it. Like you mentioned with the chiropractic, you can outline why it's not good for children. The dangers of it, the problems with the science behind it, and things like that. And obviously, it's a work situation. You can't be too forceful. You can't start calling them an idiot for believing or things like that. But you can sort of sow the seed, so to speak. You can express your doubt on the matter, explain your reasoning for it, and hopefully, if they come across something like that again, maybe they'll come to you again and say, oh, I read this. What do you think? Think about this. This is similar to what you said before. I mean, it reminds me of a thing I remember a few years ago going to my local GP, and they gave me an appointment card, and on the back of the appointment card was an advert for Reiki, and I immediately went home and wrote an angry letter to my GP saying, look, you are putting out these appointment cards with an adverts for Reiki. I think ear candling was also on the back of that, and you are giving them legitimacy by doing this. This is a complete tangent, but my point was that if you're going to have a discussion with people, you have to outline your reasons for disagreeing, be polite about it. Don't go, you're wrong, blah blah. That's often on the internet. Often it's I'm right, you're wrong, but butting heads sort of thing, because people tend to be more like that when they're anonymous and that. But when you're having to deal with people on a daily basis, you have to let them know that you disagree with them, but do it in a sort of polite way. And I mean, I think I mentioned at the beginning of my book that I used to work with one guy who didn't believe in the moon and other planets, and a woman who was convinced that Princess Diana was still alive despite being in the accident, that she was immediately picked up by the ambulance, whisked away, given plastic surgery, and now lives somewhere else in the world. And
I completely missed this part of the book.
there's how you deal with people who are coming from that things without going, you're crazy. Yeah, there's no evidence for that. I mean, like I said, the guy who didn't believe in other planets, was skeptical about the existence of the moon. And how do you address someone like that without being rude? So all you can do is sort of say, well, I disagree with you on that. Here's my evidence for this. I'll bring in a pair of binoculars. We can look at it together. But you can't insult them in any way if you're going to continue having a relationship with them, I don't think.
True, but I think it's safe to say, for myself, and I'm sure for a few other people here, that if you were in a conversation with someone and they said the moon didn't exist, you would take them outside at night, point at the big glowy orb in the sky and say, what's that then?
Yeah. I mean, I did that. I brought in my binoculars and we looked at the moon and we looked at Jupiter, which was in the sky at the time, and I didn't convince him. All I can say is that he was not convinced. He still thought it might not be real, and so I kind of stepped back from that one. I left him for that. He wasn't harming anybody, not believing in the moon. So, but all fun and games.
Okay, guys, we've got another caller. I'll be adding him in a few minutes. So, can you field some questions while I get the caller ready, guys?
Yes, I have one simple question. How to science?
Okay.
Not really sure what you mean.
Neither do I. It's just a joke phrase I use with people occasionally.
Okay, Marty, Kitch, Wolfie, can you take some questions? I'll get the caller in.
Sure, I'll see if there's anything in the IRC chat.
I don't think so.
Nope, I'll try to go on live.
All right, caller. Chris, are you there? Hello, Chris.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, Chris.
Great,
You're on with Andy. So ask your question, please.
Sure. More of an observation, really. It's you're talking about something that's interested me for a while. I'm actually a teacher, stroke lecturer, and I've often tried to get a course in, I call it intellectual self-survival, really. Started in the colleges and schools that I've worked at in the past. So this is a subject quite close to my own heart.
I mean, I think it's a subject that really should be taught. And
what would you, I mean, looking in a bit more detail at fleshing out a sort of scheme of work for this thing, the things that occurred to me, the things that occurred to me that you'd want to include would be first some idea of logical fallacies, and then definitely some work on statistics and the misleading effect to which they can be put. Are there any pet subjects that you'd like to include in any syllabus or scheme of work for this?
I think some of the things I cover in the sort of first part of my book is sort of talking about the correct use of scientific terms. What is a hypothesis? What is a theory in science? How the scientific method works. How do you identify something as pseudoscience rather than legitimate science? Things like that.
That's a deep question.
And also some of the sort of more psychological things. How sort of we play tricks on ourselves with things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance and things like that. How our brains can trick ourselves. I believe I can't remember. I have had a look at it, but it was a while ago. That the James Randi Educational Foundation has a outlined syllabus for teaching a course on logic and reason and stuff like that you can download for free from their website. And
that's interesting. I'll check that out.
That would be a great place to start. So
yeah, I'll certainly check that out. I mean, a book that I recently picked up from a cheap bin in the bookstores, but which has turned out to be a really excellent buy, is the Pocket Guide to Critical Thinking. It's by, let me just have a quick scan here, and I'll see if I can find out who it's by. It was literally just one of those lucky pickups that you come across sometimes when you're scanning the bookshop. Yeah, Epstein, Richard L. Epstein. And it's a smashing book. It's about 400 pages, so a pocket guide's probably a misnomer. But it takes you through, you know, the whole lot: formal logic, informal logical fallacies, right through a basic course. You could probably base a 6-month course on the book itself, and it's got lots of very nice exercises to have a try out with the answers in the back.
Cool.
So that's worth looking at. But yeah, this is something that interests me a lot. I think when you're looking at the cognitive dissonance that goes on with most of the theists, particularly the more wacky creationist type theists that you come across, I think there's a lot more going on there than simple misunderstandings. It's a debate that I've just been having actually in another place. Basically, it's interesting that Christians in particular not only don't really want to know much about Jesus, but actually avoid reading the Bible as much as they can, because it actually interferes with an internal model that they've already got.
I mean, I'd say there's probably some truth to that. I remember when I was a Christian, I consider myself quite knowledgeable about the Bible. Just back in my younger days, we had in my local church just had something called the Scripture exam, where you would be asked questions on scriptures and you put your answers. And
you took somebody you were
2 years running on that.
Well, I was educated by Salesian monks and Jesuits, so I'm pretty knowledgeable myself when it comes to scripture.
But what I found was that when I started to lose my faith, I actually sat down and read the Bible and realised just how much of it I was completely unaware of. Yeah. And it was that more than anything else that caused me to lose my faith, was sitting down and reading it from beginning to end and realising, no idea about this bit, didn't know about this bit, this makes no sense, you know. And
an interesting exercise I've done a few times with theists, particularly when they start interrupting my philosophy forum, is to ask them just to give me a sketch of the life of Jesus in, say, 10, 12 bullet points. Give me some of the chronological or some sort of chronological order of the significant and most important events in his life. Just 12 points, and maybe include a couple of quotes, and almost nobody can do it. Now, if you imagine a pop fan, say, looking at a pop band, they would know everything about that person. They would know his, what colour he liked, what he liked to eat, his favourite clothes, and everything else. So it's startling, actually, how little the average Christian actually does know, even from the source material, the Scripture.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, go ahead, Wolfie.
I myself, I can relate to both of you guys. I was a Christian in my earlier years, and yes, one of the big blows to that was reading the actual book. I went to Bible camps. I thought I knew quite a lot about it, but that's until you actually read the whole thing and your whole, not just your image of just Jesus, but the image of just the God character in general. That really changes everything. But yes, you're right. If you just some Christians that I pop up with don't know their own book. Like, you ask them, well, did Jesus like to go sailing? Well, if they knew the book of Mark, they would say, yeah, he did. But no, most of them say Jesus is a great guy. He and I are cool. And some of them, these are the ones I love the most. They say, I know Jesus personally.
Yeah, they nearly always say that.
That's my
I have
favorite.
a relationship with him.
Yes, I have a relationship with him. Because then my next question right away is something like, what color are his eyes? And they have a blank look on their face, and they're like, I don't know. Well, I thought you knew him.
I normally ask,
relationship.
I asked them for any piece of information that he's vouchsafed to them that I might find interesting or novel or new or even surprising, and I've yet to find one. But I mean, it's obvious when you look at the structure of the Bible. It's quite clear that it's two completely separate works stuck together. So the reason that Christians don't read the Old Testament is quite obvious. I mean, there is no way that you can come to any other rational conclusion that Yahweh is a complete monster. He's a insupportable fiend. He's a tyrant, and the interesting thing is most of my Jewish friends and acquaintances are quite comfortable with that, and they say, oh well, we're Jewish, what do you think? we get picked on always, even from God, which is quite a nice way of looking at it. It's the Christians who got the supposed lovey-dovey version of God in the New Testament who are much more uptight about this than Jews. I don't know why that is, but that's my experience anyway that I've found. But yeah, you can't avoid reading the Old Testament and coming to the conclusion that God's a monster. Hence, people like William Lane Craig, of course, come into real trouble when they try to say, on the one hand, that they're pretty scriptural literalists. He believes it's pretty much history. And on the other hand, that God is the source of all morality. Well, this source of all morality committed, we don't have a word for it, do we? Genocide's not big enough. Omnicide, maybe? Committed omnicide, wiped everything out. Well, if that's absolute morality, then it can't change. So if it was moral then, it's moral now. So murder is therefore moral in his book, and he runs into all sorts of trouble then when he tries to explain it, and he ends up justifying genocide essentially.
Yeah. When it comes to William Craig, he's really full of it when he's trying to defend the Old Testament and says that God did not order the genocide of the Canaanites. Well, yes, he bloody did. Yes, he did.
He never mentioned wiping out or chasing. It's absolutely in there. Just read Judges. It's straightforward.
God totally didn't cause a flood. He just made it rain a lot.
I want to also throw
always
something out there really quickly. A while ago, we were talking about what to teach in schools, or how to think and how to do science, how the scientific method works. Now, like I said earlier on, science. I'm sorry. Did you guys lose me for a second?
No, you're all right.
Okay, all right, I'm back. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, I have a degree in history. I'm not science, but I did take science classes, mainly lab courses, and they chemistry or biology, and they just give you stuff to do or experiments to try, and you go do it. And if you understand that material, then generally you're good at it, or you pass or whatever. But they do walk you through how the scientific method works, but they don't really teach you how to think or evaluate evidence. But in history, they do teach you how to evaluate certain types of evidence, mainly your sources. Primary sources, the secondary sources, what doesn't count, like hearsay. And it's that sort of training that helped me understand the sources in the Bible. Are they reliable? Who wrote them? Do we even know? And, well, I generally lost my faith before I learned this, but when I'm looking back, I'm like, if I knew how to evaluate these sort of stories back then, I'd be like, I would have not accepted that at all. It would be almost on par with the Greek myths.
I think you've hit it on the head there, because basically the only tools we can use are the tools of the historian, aren't they? When we're looking at the Bible, and particularly when we're trying to reconcile the archaeology and the actual physical evidence with what's written in Scripture, you need to be familiar with the skills of a historian. The scientist's skills are not really going to be much use to you. You're not going to be doing much hypothesis testing.
If you're going to analyze the utterly stupid claims made in the beginning of Genesis, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Then science definitely applicable.
Yeah, plants before sun and that sort of thing. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Also, if you were to take a chapter or even a whole book like Acts of the Apostles, which is considered the historical document describing the early days of Christian Church, and you take into account that the only reason I think it was Paul that did it, is because of a few little things like the openings of those two books are kind of similar, and there's also some other things. And he says we instead of they sometimes. Ooh, must be Paul.
I'm afraid I'm becoming more and more. I'm actually tending more and more as I get older to become more of a mythicist. So I'm actually almost. I'd say I'm about 75% convinced that it's not even sensible to talk about a real historical character that we would recognise as Jesus. I'm not saying there wasn't anything there. That there was probably some sort of mendicant sort of preacher, come itinerant,
I say
rebel.
he was a donkey salesman.
But I'm basically saying Jesus, as we could even recognise him in the scriptures, didn't exist as an actual character. And I think the evidence, as we move away from theology students basically doing all the work, up to now, biblical studies has been a disgrace really to academia. I speak as somebody who works in academia. Bible studies and theology as a subject are both really a stain on academic integrity. They've been done by people who are already of one side already, and will defend that to the death, despite logic and reason on the other side. It's only fairly recently that anything approaching impartial work's been done in Bible studies. People like Bart Ehrman, for example, who started off as a Christian, but I think he's taught himself gradually into being an atheist, and he's done some honest work in this, and his conclusions are quite clear, really. 70% to 90% of what we read, Jesus never said, couldn't have said, and not only didn't say it, but there's no possibility that he could ever say it. All the work by the Jesus Seminar and various other committees of Bible scholars that have been got together to try and look at the historicity of the New Testament, they're all pretty much telling us the same thing. Most of it's bunk, It
is funny, as someone who did study, as it's called in Northern Ireland, RE, or religious education, which is hilarious because it's just the one fucking religion and the one subset of that one religion, which...
I got the Jesuit version, mate.
And it's not just studying the theology or studying the just the book. It's also the archaeology that's just going down the tubes too.
Yeah.
And there are professors coming out and saying this whole field of study for many years has just been a waste of time. One of them that comes to my mind is Hector Avalos. He's a professor at, I believe, the University of Minnesota. I met him once. I actually had lunch with him, and I met his wife and everything. And we were just engaged in the conversations regarding what are we still teaching, or what are we still trying to learn, and we're not really going anywhere with that.
Well, basically, if you think about what's happened, the Israeli government basically said to its archaeologists, look, here, unlimited funds, unlimited budget, prove the Old Testament, go away and we'll let you into all the parts of the Middle East that we've now got access to since the Six-Day War. You've got all this unlimited resource, go and show us what you've got. And they came back, and to their credit, they're pretty honest about this. I do credit the Israeli archaeologists with more honesty in this than most Christian apologists. They basically said, "Well, nothing doing, guys. We can't show even that these things existed. Never mind some sort of chronology or a verifiable basis to the Exodus or Moses or any of it, really." It's all pretty non-existent as regards the evidence. And if another guy to look up on that would be Finkelstein. He's an Israeli. He's well worth a read. I believe he was a believing Jew, or he may be on the. I mean, there's a tradition in Judaism, isn't there, of pretty much atheist Judaism, if I can put it that way. But yeah, Finkelstein's serially honest on this, and he comes to the conclusion pretty much it's all made up.
Yeah, one other quick and good point, and I think I'll just this will be my last point, and this is regarding to Andrew. Another thing to apply the skeptical toolkit. One that comes to my mind, especially regarding the archaeology part. James Randi actually made a short video regarding the archaeology that's going on in Israel and how that there are some bits of it. Well, the sites they dig up still don't match the stories. And even though that these archaeological sites are being just like thrown out there on the media, like, "Ooh, we found this city, therefore the story in the OT is true," but they're like, well, "No, you have not." I don't know. They're not looking through it as clear as they should. It's not matching the story. It's not even matching the locations or whatever. The size of the city is like way off proportion. It isn't even a town. It's just a hamlet or whatever.
David. Yeah, David was some sort of little minor royalty, unimportant guy. You've got the Canaanites actually giving rise to Israel rather than being the great rebel that Israel went and conquered and wiped out. It looks more and more now as though the Israelis and the Canaanites lived pretty much together for about 4 centuries. Israeli society sort of grew out of Canaanites to the extent where Yahweh, the god Yahweh, their god, is a Canaanite god. He comes from the Canaanite pantheon. You know, he was one of the 4 deities that the Canaanites had in the main pantheon. He was a war god, Io or Io, various names he's used. So they to add insult to injury, they first of all write in their own scriptures that the Canaanites were these bestial people that they needed to wipe out, when the reverse was true. And if you look at what's said in the Bible about the Canaanites, those are actually old Hebrew practices that they transferred onto the Canaanites to make them appear more bestial as they demonized them as they turned in from a polytheist to a monotheist religion. So yeah, they didn't only demonize the Canaanites, they nicked the god and then turned it into a monotheistic god, which is a bit cheeky, really.
It does. The more I hear about it, it does kind of sound like the early Israelis were like the rebellious little shit team that was like, you know what, fuck you, I'm going over here and you're a dick. And then they write in their diary, yeah, today I really stuck it to the man and did this, that, and the other. They were dicks. And then someone finds this 1,000 years later and says, wow, they fought a great battle, not realizing it was just a bunch of angry assholes.
Yeah. I don't know. When it comes to like the history and the Bible, like Chris, you mentioned that you were borderline mythicist. To be honest,
I'm becoming. I was always. It seemed to me that the evidence for Jesus was always quite strong. But the more I've read and the more I've got older and probably a bit more skeptical and a bit more cantankerous in my older age, the more I am coming round to the mythicist case. And I read recently Jesus, Neither God Nor Man, which is well worth a read if you're into looking at this case, by the, what's his name? I can't remember. I'll look it up later, but it's well worth a read, and he goes into it in some detail, making the case.
I think I know the book, and to be honest, I'm kind of actually, my position, I'm kind of right there with you. I'm actually a really big fan of Richard Carrier. I've met the guy like twice, and anyway. I'm not saying that there ever was a single guy. Maybe there even maybe it was a dozen or so, but I think I could pretty much say that the character portrayed in the New Testament, that guy was either highly exaggerated from some. Either he was never real, or that he was so insignificant that nobody ever bothered to mention him.
And if you're able to bring people back from the dead, and come back from the dead after being crucified by the Romans, and you're not well known, it'd be kind of hard to understand. You'd think that there'd be a scholar.
I know there's like this recent thing that came up that's been spreading around YouTube and Facebook and other social medias, that there's going to be some sort of lecture if Jesus was a Roman construction. It's actually an interesting idea. Nobody has read it yet. Nobody's seen the presentation, so we cannot make up our minds about it yet. So we need to see the evidence put forward. But still, good idea to bring that skeptical.
The most persuasive part I found in the mythicist case is the case they make based around Paul's writings, and It's Earl Doherty, by the way, is the person I was trying to think of who wrote the Jesus Neither God Nor Man. Well worth a read, Earl Doherty. But basically, the case is that Paul really never speaks about Jesus. He speaks about the Platonic ideal form, the spiritual realm, the realms of the ideals, the realms of the notional. So Jesus is a mythical spirit being living on the astral plane somewhere up there. But he never mentions any of the actual events of Jesus' life in his writings at all. And I think there's only two or three mentions of Jesus as a character at all, as a human physical character. And those are so vague.
Close to the end of his life, the end of his ministry.
Exactly. Yeah, so this all, I mean, it's, 20 years before he's talking about? You think he might have just used a quote from Jesus every now and again to make the point that he was making. He never did. So it all points to the fact that he's a construct, and that Paul is basically building his case for his own religion, which is pretty much what Catholicism became, wasn't it? It was Pauline Christianity with a big P. Hence the misogyny and all the rest of it. But that he was building his own little sect in a band of competing, maybe 50 or 60 competing sects, all trying to get their own message across. With maybe Mary Magdalene heading one of them up at one end, we don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of nice possibilities there. But certainly, yeah, it looks more and more to me like the things are constructs, and the only. The way that the Gospels and then the Acts, for example, which was mentioned earlier, the Acts was written later, much later, I think. The way it changes construction as it goes along. So, for example, look at Judas. Judas is first portrayed as somebody who was basically not evil, but was basically inconvenienced by the devil, if we put it that way. The devil overcame. Later on. Read the last Gospel in John. He's portrayed as a thieving, conniving, horrible Jew. Now, why? Because the Pauline Christians then were splitting from Judaism. They were no longer Jews. They had a vested interest then in separating themselves from Judaism and portraying the Jews as the evil sort of aliens or the evil rivals. Whereas until that time, they were Jews. I mean, this was a Jewish sect. So, and you can see that split occur actually within the scriptures as you're reading through them. If you look, and it's so obvious once you see the joins, you begin to see more and more of them.
If I could just kind of like to point out that there's 10, 20 minutes left.
Sorry, I'm monopolising. Apologies.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. We should get back to the guy that we were actually here to talk to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chris, you're welcome to call in anytime. Call in the future. You're very welcome. It's been great having you on. You can stay in the call and listen in here if you want.
Sure,
no problem.
We'll do, yeah. But I'll be quiet now.
Y'all hush up now, you hear?
We've got the Northern Irish diplomacy at work here.
well said.
No bricks, bottles, or explosives, so it's not Northern Ireland.
Right, Angry, you were going to ask a chat room question for
I
Andy.
was. If I can get the fucking thing here. Yes. Great Bob, which is such a very humble name, asks to Andrew, what was the most awkward question you've ever heard a theist idealist try to push onto you?
Blimey. Awkward question. I don't really know if this is the sort of thing they were expecting, but I always find it entertaining when you end up in a situation where you have a theist trying to defend genocide as a good thing because God committed it and God can only do good things. I think that's always interesting, where you have this person who, on the one hand, is claiming the moral high ground because they are a Christian and their morality comes from God, but on the other hand are being forced to defend the mass murder of an entire people because God did it, so it must be good. And I think that's always an entertaining one.
there is one question related to the book. You do go a bit into philosophy, and like I say, and philosophy can be very off-putting for a lot of people because it's, it's got the image of people having these hour-long meaningless debates. And but is there any kind of supplemental material alongside your book that you could recommend for anyone who's just intimidated by the field of philosophy at all? Is there any good books you can recommend to go along with it?
I'll be honest, I'm not much of a philosopher myself.
Yeah. But when you hear like the philosopher speaking and it's isms and ologies and it can make a lot, the layperson's eyes glaze over very quickly. Is there any kind of people you can recommend that give it, like, kind of break it down to a really good level, just for the, like, say myself, I'm an engineer, so I've no idea about philosophy at all.
I'm trying to think.
Excuse me for a second. We've got
His house is on
anybody
fire.
Anybody else got any suggestions? I can't think of any names off the top of my head of people who provide good introduction to philosophy and stuff.
Dan Dennett. Daniel Dennett.
I think Stephen Law does some stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry about that.
that's all right. I am completely failing to answer the question. That's
Right.
you didn't miss much.
In that case, you're a bad person and you should feel bad.
Definitely. To be honest, I mean, like you said, I only really touch on philosophy in the book. There's only like one chapter which really deals with a philosophical look at things, and I got the majority of that argument from the atheist experience. So Tracy Harris is my recommendation for the philosopher in question. In that case, she put a very good argument forward about looking at whether something is real or not. What do we mean by something being real? When people say that God is real, what do they mean by that? Does he have any physical properties? Does he interact with things? Can we measure him in any way? If not, what exactly do they mean by real? And if something can be real and yet have no physical properties, not be measured, not interact in any way, then anything can be real. You can make the argument that anything you can imagine is real if it does not need to have any of those properties. And I mean, that's as much philosophy as I touch on in my book, and I don't go into any great depth because it's a field I've always, like you said, it's one that's difficult to wade into. It seems to be all deep end. As far as I can
you can't just
tell
put your
from-
toe in to test the water at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I chuck a couple of books out here that might be useful?
All right.
Consciousness Explained by Dan Dennett, Kinds of Mind by Dan Dennett, and How the Mind Works by Steven Pinker. All probably worth getting into if you're into that side of it.
And probably one from a previous guest we've had, Stephen Law's books are come in highly recommended. I haven't gone round to reading them yet, but I think there's the Philosophy Gym or something like that. And Stephen Law's very open that he hates all the kind of jargon that gets thrown around, and he thinks that philosophy should be more accessible. And there's another question. The one thing I always come up against being a skeptic, and it's like when I've had debates just with family members and friends, and it's, why are you so miserable and why are you so cynical? How do you deal with that? Because it's the one thing, even like, I remember once at work I had like a skeptic magazine, and they say, oh, that must be awfully depressing reading just about how this doesn't exist and that doesn't exist. How do you, combat, when people think you're just a cynic if you're a skeptic?
I guess probably because by simply being passionate about it.
Yeah.
I think, as many of my friends will attest, I can talk about this stuff for hours, and I will go on and I will get excited and animated and stuff. And I imagine it'd be very hard to talk to me about it and think I was being cynical and miserable and all that, because I find it fascinating. I find the skeptical approach to the world, the scientific way of looking at things, the way of getting into the detail of things and trying to find the truth out there, rather than saying, "Oh, this is true for me." It's being interested in what is really true. What can we find out about the world? What information is there out there? How can we better understand the universe and everything? And I think that's fascinating. I think it's anybody who says that skeptics are miserable, people like that, clearly doesn't understand what being a skeptic is. A skeptic is being passionate about the truth, about wanting to know things, about looking at the ideas you have and wanting to know which of those ideas are correct, and to get rid of the ones that aren't correct because you passionately want to sit and understand the world on the world's terms. And I don't understand how people can view someone as being cynical when they have that mindset. So
couldn't agree more.
I don't think I really argue against them. I don't really say, well, no, I'm not cynical. I just demonstrate that I'm not, that I'm happy and passionate, and that this stuff makes me happy. It doesn't make me miserable. It makes me excited and happy. And
One other thing, what was the very first kind of bit of pseudoscience that you really got your teeth into that kind of started you off as, your passion and skepticism?
It was when I was still a Christian.
Yeah.
I had a friend who is a professional young Earth creationist. He goes around the country giving lectures on young Earth creations, and I believed him. He was a friend. I was a Christian. I believed what he said. And when I started to lose my faith, I started reading about the alternative. I started reading about evolution, which up to that point I thought was completely rubbish. And I started reading about it and mainly watching videos on YouTube and things like that. And very quickly it became apparent to me that where the evidence lies and which arguments are supported by the evidence and things like that. So I guess creationism was the first bit of pseudoscience I found myself dealing with. I actually set out at that point in my life going, well, I've got my doubts about this. Let's find out what the arguments against it are so I can shoot them down. Watched a couple of videos on evolution and went, bloody hell, this makes perfect sense. It's logical, it's straightforward. You can't argue against this, and look at all the evidence. And then you start looking at the creationist argument where it's basically, and God did it. How did God did it? Well, we don't know. He just did it, and it's the evidence just isn't there. So I guess when I was starting out, one of the first things I wrote when I used to update a blog on a regular basis was a critique of this old friend of mine's one of his talks that he'd recorded and put online, and I went through it line by line, critiquing it, saying this is inaccurate, this is why this is wrong, and so creationism.
Okay. Probably related to that, it's just I'm going to quickly try to bring to who have been the most passionate true believers in defense of their junk science. Probably, we'll take creationists out because
and just say, Kitch, please mute. All I hear is banging and crashing, and you're being bad. Don't make us put you outside again.
We'll send an angry Irish woman on you.
What the fuck?
I guess my experience has primarily been religious people defending things like creationism and that. I think they've been very passionate because it's not just an idea with them. It's not just something they happen to believe. It's not like they go about the rest of their lives and then there's creationism. It's their entire worldview is tied in with this idea, so that people often be very passionate about that. And I guess things like anti-vaccination people, because again, it's such a personal belief. I mean, you look at things like 9/11 conspiracies and people who believe lizards run the world and things like that, and it's a crazy belief they have, but it's just an extra thing with things like anti-vax and creationism and stuff. It's so central to who they are. It's so personal in their lives that I think that's what makes them so passionate about it.
I think the most passionate I've come across are definitely the 9/11 truthers. and
I've not had much experience, so I can't.
I've just found they're very quick to resort to threats and slurs. It's almost instant with them. I think Mortimer, you know this. Well, myself and Mortimer know this very well. We had a guy
those
kind of
guys
basic,
after me was just
yeah, and he started stalking the show because he was actually demanding to be a guest on the show, and his demand was, "Hey, you fucking assholes! I want to go on your bigoted forum." And I said, "That's not really a good way to become a guest on the show."
That's how I got on here.
But you've got a balaclava and you're Northern Irish, so you can.
Yeah, I suppose I do have the real fear factor. But I think it's not so much about the belief, because I do know there's a fella I used to go to school with, and he was a 9/11 truther. Like, he showed me a lot of these videos, and at the time I was like, ooh, all this minor little bits and pieces sort of makes sense in the grand scheme. And then I kind of thought about it and read into it a bit more and realised that the design of the towers was shit, that the floors caved in of their own accord, stuff like that. And I actually went back to him and said, I watched that video and it was kind of good, but, here's some other evidence. And rather than be like, you're a fucking dick, his response was, oh, fair enough, I'll have a look at it later. Came back to me the next day and said, well, I read that, watched that, and found that fairly interesting, but I still believe what I believe based on the evidence I have. I have to say, I was fucking dumbfounded. Because, this is when I'd started putting my toe in the water of internet atheism, as I would call it. And up until then, every time I'd had a minor disagreement with someone on their beliefs, they'd be, you're a fucking dick, die in a fire. And then just for someone to say, well, you might have a point, but I'll keep going about what I believe, was just, wow. So I do think it has a lot to do with the person themselves and the way, or not so much the way, the method of reaching them. Across the internet, there's anonymity, which breeds assholism. And when it's face-to-face with someone that you work with or go to school with or spend a lot of time with, it's kind of a lot more personal, and you can't get as inflamed. So
I suppose just one last question, Andy, and then we'll kind of go around to everyone for their final thoughts. What do you think's the most pressing and most urgent bit of kind of pseudoscience that needs addressing at the current time?
If
you had to put
global warming,
yeah,
all the people who make the issue of global warming a political one, who deny that it's happening. I mean, this is all the other things we've mentioned there. Some of them may have a body count attached, but potentially, if we don't do something about climate change, most of us are screwed, I imagine. I mean, I live in East Anglia, so we're underwater. the sea level rises. I'm getting drowned out. So I'd imagine I think that's probably the most important thing. If we just had to focus on one area of pseudoscience, getting rid of those people. So.
Can I just point out, I live in Ireland and I'm on a hill, so bring it on, bitches.
Well, actually, technically,
I think you'll find that if you look at the projections, you'll find that in the UK we're not actually in that much trouble as regards this. The people who are in the real trouble are the people who can least afford to be in the real trouble, mainly in Asia. And I mean real trouble. I'm talking 500 million people possibly dying there. But in UK, we're not going to really suffer much above inconvenience. Certainly not mass body counts. I'm with you, by the way. I'm not trying to minimise anything here, but if you look at the IPCC projections and then look at the Met's projections, very tentative they are about them, of course, since they got so much stake. But they've done some 30-year tentative projections, and you're not looking about huge flooding in England. You're looking a few inches more, no more than that. But when you start looking at Bangladesh and you start looking at low-lying areas of Pakistan, then you're really into the deep shit.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. So I'll just go around my co-hosts for their final thoughts. Kitch?
A very interesting discussion, and I hope everyone watching on a panel and on the audience, I know I have, come away with something new.
And also buy the book as well. If you go to,
Yes.
I think it's the right or left hand side, but you'll see some links up on this one side of the screen, and you'll see Andrew's name there. Click on that, it goes to his website, and it'll give you all the info for the book. So go somewhere, I don't know, or do the YMCA, I don't know. Marty, what's your final thoughts, please?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that. Get the book, because, like I said before, I haven't read much of it, but I like what I've read, and I intend to read the rest of it.
And Wolfie, the old man of Tool, will call you from now on.
Can't stress this enough. Just get the book.
Yeah.
I read.
We're not being
Agreed.
paid by this guy, by the way.
No, it's all right. I intend to buy it. Don't worry. I'm an avid book reader.
If you want
I'm a
to
reader,
pay
and I'm a reader, and I promote books that I really enjoy. And this one was just straightforward. It was easy to read. It was very informal, and it's packed. It's packed with all the appropriate skeptic tools. So, and with all the, like, as we were all going on about addressing the issues, like some of the big issues that we have to deal with regarding pseudoscience or just made up conspiracy stuff, everybody should be prepared with these sort of tools, just to see past through that stuff and address the stuff that really matters. Address why people believe this stuff. I mean, the one that I still have in my head: who doubts the moon is real? Really?
What is it Carl Sagan called it? The bullshit detection kit, isn't it?
Okay, and
Doesn't the janitor from Scrubs?
and Andy, you've got a little soapbox moment now, so away you go.
Right. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for having me on the show. I very much appreciate it. It's the first sort of proper publicity I've had for the book, and I'm very pleased you all seem to enjoy it so much. I think that, as we've sort of said over the conversation, that skepticism and critical thinking is so important. That in the world we live now, we're coming up against things that affect real people, affects our lives and stuff. You know, there in the scientific community there isn't an issue, a question about whether global warming is happening or whether vaccines cause autism and stuff. And yet you have people arguing against these things. You have people suffering from diseases that are practically eradicated because they're not getting their vaccines. You have, people making policies that could lead to disaster in 30 years' time because they don't want to accept the science because it's not convenient for them. And I think that logic and critical thinking and a good dose of skepticism is probably the only way we're going to deal with these problems. So, yes, I like Chris's idea. We should have courses on skepticism and critical thinking in every school. Teach children how to think, not what to think, and then, fingers crossed we won't come across so many of these problems in the future.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much, Andy. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been great, thanks.
Just to let everyone know, we're back this time next week, and it'll be a pretty much reduced panel because it's going to be Lundy. We're interviewing a man by the name of Robert Johnson, who's written a book on secular morality. It's called Rational Morality, the Science of Right and Wrong. And as it's going to be a pretty much philosophy show, we're just going to let Big Lundy, who sadly can't be here tonight, he's just going to run with that. And then after that, on the 25th of October, we've got Robert Schaefer, Marty, you've got a wee bit of knowledge on a UFO debunker.
Yeah, UFO debunker, yeah, like you said.
And then on the 2nd of November, there's that Matt Dillahunty fellow's coming in. Still can't figure it out. He won't leave us alone, he's just begging to come.
You keep mentioning him, but I have no idea who.
Yeah, I keep having to say And then on the 9th of November, we got Steve Wells, the author of The Skeptic's Annotated Bible, which is just out in paperback. And 16th of November, I'm currently, I think it's going to be John W. Loftus is going to be our guest.
Nice.
Yeah, Faraday. Can you quickly explain who Mr. Loftus is?
What I know about him is from the 3 books that he published. Why I'm an Atheist. We also 2 of the other ones that he put forth was The End of Christianity and The Christian Delusion. I've read all 3 of those books, and it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The End of Christianity and the Christian Delusion, it's a combination of like a dozen or so different authors, and some of them include my favorites, like Richard Carrier. So maybe it's because my favorite authors are included in them, maybe why I'm a little biased, but overall, John Loftus, brilliant guy, right? Really great author. So yeah, I really look forward to having him on the show.
Okay, and then 23rd of November, we've got Kurt and some guy called Tilson. Kitch, do you know Kitch Marty? You ever heard of this Tilson fellow?
No.
Wasn't he the guy?
Yeah.
Wasn't he the guy? And I got news for you.
But yeah, it's a good friend, Tilson, from Skeptic TV, who they're on a very long hiatus at the moment. So Skeptic TV, if you're listening, please come back. We're missing you a lot. But yeah, that's them from the Danish Atheist Society. And after that, I'm working on upcoming guests. So like I said, follow our blog and our Twitter and the Facebook and the podcast, and you'll get all the info. And also, very big thank you to Angry Pumpkin and Chris for calling in.
More than welcome. I'm sorry I monopolised it so much.
It's okay. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Come on here.
Yeah. I say thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you same time next week. Good night, everyone.
See you. Good night.
Bye.